What's up, guys? I'm DK Wrestler, and today you're viewing our latest edition of our podcast of Funko POPcast. Now, of course, most of the time we strictly just talk about Funko Pops, but this is one of those occasions where it's basically the opposite of that, as we are celebrating 40 years of WrestleMania this year, with this weekend being WrestleMania 40 in Philadelphia. Myself and my co-host MD Shady will be going through the different WrestleManias that have occurred and give our opinions of them. And because this podcast is just too big for one episode, this will be a two-part podcast. So you're about to view our first installment. So let's get right to it.
Yeah, WrestleMania, of course, is the night for wrestlers and wrestling fans alike. I mean, it's amazing. The way that it's booked is generally pretty good. You have all of your top talent performing. And one story that I figured I might as well come right out with is I remember way back in the day when I was just a young guy, I always thought that WrestleMania was the Royal Rumble. So I remember that Mania was coming around and I was so excited because I loved watching previous Royal Rumbles when I was over at one of my dad's friend's house. And then Mania came on and I was like, what the hell is this? This is not what I want it to be. But then, of course, I've learned that WrestleMania is, for some people, of course, better than the Royal Rumble. And WrestleMania is now, or at least at one point was home to the Money in the Bank ladder match. And of course, the whole spectacle, again, like you said, with Undertaker and his streak. So yeah, WrestleMania has, of course, a long lineage now of 40 years, and it's definitely the big one.
We got to start off with the first one, WrestleMania I, that happened on March 31st, 1985 in Madison Square Garden in New York City. Only a couple of WrestleManias that I remember off the top of my head. Of course, the main event was Mr. T and Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper, which I should also, nice little cheap plug is, if you're a huge wrestling fan, I did start up a new wrestling channel called Pro Wrestling What If. So you guys definitely should check that out. A lot of cool what ifs as terms to wrestling, especially WrestleMania as of late on the channel. So there's that match. And then one match that I remember because of playing the WWE 2K14 portion of the 30 years of WrestleMania Showcase mode is the $15,000 body slam challenge between Andre the Giant and Big John Studd. So those are really the only two matches I could think of off the top of my head as terms to the first WrestleMania that, without how it was booked and everything, I don't even think we'd be here talking about WWE as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the one that started it all. And in the Garden, which is now, of course, that place, the Garden's amazing. I would love to go see a wrestling event there at some point in my life. That'd be really cool. But yeah, like you said, with the body slam challenge, that was really cool. And that's something that people have talked about for decades now at this point. And then, of course, you have that infamous picture of Hulk Hogan and Mr. T from the main event.
For WrestleMania II, it happened on April 7th, 1986, but some people actually don't know that this WrestleMania actually happened in 3 arenas throughout the night. First one happened at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. One happened at Rosemont Horizon in Rosemont, Illinois, which is in outskirts of Chicago. And then at the Los Angeles Sports Coliseum in Los Angeles, California, which that venue was the host to the main event, which was King Kong Bundy versus Hulk Hogan in a steel cage match for the WWE Championship. And then that was also the WrestleMania, I believe, where Mr. T and Roddy Piper had a singles match, but it was a boxing match. And then the one other match I can actually think of, because I've seen clips of it, there was a tag team match. I want to say it was Hart Foundation and British Bulldogs. I'm not exactly sure, but I know of this because the British Bulldogs, out of all people, they had come out as their manager is Ozzy Osbourne, which was pretty cool. I remember seeing clips of that.
I completely forgot all about that, but as soon as you said that, that definitely sparked a memory. And then talking about the Hogan and King Kong Bundy match, this is definitely one that I've watched a few times over, especially as a kid. My grandfather was a huge fan of King Kong Bundy and Hulk Hogan, so he made sure that I had seen that match as a youngin', but that's definitely one that I have to rewatch because it's been a long time.
WrestleMania III took place March 29th, 1987 at the Pontiac Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, which is the outskirts of Detroit. Two matches that spark off the top of my head. The first one, obviously, people would know of being Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant for the WWE title, the big, huge body slam that is engraved in our memories as a wrestling fan for the last few decades and probably will be for the next few decades and forever and ever. And then also, as terms to in-ring spectacle of a nice in-ring style match, is Ricky the Dragon Steamboat versus Macho Man Randy Savage. Of course, I was not alive in 1987. I was born in 1996. But being a pro wrestler myself, a match I was definitely recommended was watching this. And when I watched this, I'm like, damn, this is some good. Like, if you are getting into the wrestling business and you want something like very classic watch, this is a great match. And I feel like you watch this match, and this was kind of the match that sparked up kind of the style of wrestling that we see today.
So starting off with the Hulk Hogan and Andre, I mean, one of the most recognizable two people in the business and one of the most like iconic moments, and definitely for WrestleMania moments, of Hulk Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant. But that definitely does not take away from the Ricky and Macho Man match. That is such a great match. And of course, George the Animal Steele being alongside Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I love George Steele too. I actually met him when I was a kid. So that match is really cool with some huge names in the business.
Next up is WrestleMania IV, happened on March 27th, 1988 at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I kind of find this WrestleMania was lackluster in the sense that literally 9/10 of the matches out of like a whole 18 match card, which was a little ridiculous, was a tournament to determine the vacant WWE championship. I feel like you could have just done well, I mean, there wasn't weekly TV back in the, well, there was, but it wasn't like Raw or SmackDown where you can execute those kind of like weekly TV matches. But like, I felt like that whole tournament could have been avoided had they not done the whole stupid thing a month prior where there was the twin referees with like Dave and Earl Hebner, and then it caused the title to go vacant. And Andre the Giant, if that in that case, wouldn't have had a 36-second title reign and tried to sell the title to Ted DiBiase, thus creating this tournament. We should have just gotten Andre and Hogan Part 2 as a rematch. That would have been big money there. But of course, the main event, which ended up being the finals, was Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ted DiBiase, which it was really cool to see Macho Man hold the title for the first time there, considering that at that point he had turned babyface from being a heel the year prior against Ricky Steamboat. He indeed at this point was the number 2 guy in WWE. And I think either way, I think I would have been fine because like Ted DiBiase, it's so surprising that man being literally, in my opinion, one of, if not the best heel of the golden era, why he didn't hold the WWE championship at any point.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy to think about. But at that time, I feel like you have to put the title on Macho Man and cement him as, like you said, the second guy in the business right below Hogan.
WrestleMania V, which took place April 2nd, 1989, also took place at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So this is the WrestleMania where the mega powers imploded. We had Hulk Hogan versus Macho Man for the WWE title. There was also the Intercontinental Championship match with Rick Rude and Ultimate Warrior, which I already knew about prior to seeing that it was included in the 2K24 installment of the 40 Years of WrestleMania Showcase mode. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is off the top of my head, I actually don't have matches listed on my notes because I wanted to like use my memory and see what I could remember. Andre the Giant and Jake the Snake Roberts had a singles match that ended in a DQ. And then other than that, I believe Heart Foundation had a match in there, but I can't remember who they faced. I think it was Rhythm and Blues. But overall, I mean, I definitely think it would have been better than 4 because it wasn't just like an entire tournament for the most part for that WrestleMania.
Yeah, I feel like this one is kind of a forgettable mania, but at the same time, with the mega powers imploding, just such a great kind of moment there too, that feud and like their whole bond, and of course their like real life feud of like not really loving each other. It's so interesting to look back on.
Next up is WrestleMania VI, April 1st, 1990, took place at the Sky Dome in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This is where we had the winner takes all champion versus champion, Intercontinental Champion Ultimate Warrior versus WWE Champion Hulk Hogan. This was also the WrestleMania with the mixed tag match where you had Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire versus Macho King Randy Savage and Queen Sensational Sherry. This was also the Mania. I believe at this point Andre was in a tag team with Haku, and it was called like the Colossals of Titan. I don't even know what the tag team name was, but I remember at this Mania, I believe at this point, Andre broke apart from Bobby Heenan and that he turned babyface here. And this was like nearing the end of Andre's career because we know that he was dealing with a lot of health problems at this point, and he would unfortunately pass away a couple years after that. But overall, I mean, being in a city like Toronto, I don't want to be biased because we're so close to that, but like Toronto is like one of the best places for wrestling in the entire world. Like Toronto, Chicago, New York, and especially London, England, like those are in like the top 5 best cities for wrestling. That crowd was indeed 50-50. And that was also the WrestleMania you would have seen clips where you've seen Edge and Christian in the audience that night.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree that in Toronto, it is definitely a huge wrestling city. And like you said, bringing up Chicago and New York are definitely two big ones as well. But yeah, we are a little biased towards Toronto, and this Mania is pretty cool. And of course, yeah, like you said, with that clip of Edge and Christian in the crowd, very, very cool, especially to see where their careers have gone since then. And obviously being fans at such a small age or a young age. But yeah, Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior, really cool. I don't know, is this the first time that WWE ever had a like unification match of titles? Do you know if that's true or not?
Like at WrestleMania?
I guess.
I would definitely say at Mania that probably was the first title for obviously like way before a unification match we're going to be talking about that happened at WrestleMania 38. But yeah, like, and also I believe little fact check is that this probably would have been the first and only time at this point where the Intercontinental Championship main events WrestleMania.
Yeah, that is definitely something to point out too. That's crazy. And the Intercontinental Championship is my favorite championship of all time. So that's a cool little history piece.
Next up is WrestleMania 7, took place March 24th, 1991 at the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena in Los Angeles, California. This is where the main event was Hulk Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter for the WWE Championship. I know there was talks about having the rematch from WrestleMania 6 with Warrior and Hogan, where then obviously Hogan would take the title back from Warrior, but there was something going on whether it was like Warrior couldn't sell as much as Hogan to where they decided not to have that match or whatever. But this is where I can now remember this is Undertaker's first WrestleMania. So it's Undertaker versus Jimmy Snuka. This is also the WrestleMania where we had the retirement match with Randy Savage and Ultimate Warrior, where at the end, obviously Randy Savage, who being the heel, lost the match. Sensational Sherry kind of like slaps Macho Man and calls him a piece of garbage, whatever. And Miss Elizabeth comes out and they reunite, which is such a heartfelt moment there. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, once again, like memories just clicking in from my knowledge, I believe this is also the WrestleMania where finally Virgil breaks apart from I almost said Macho Man, from Million Dollar Man Ted DiBiase, and they have a match against each other.
Yeah, that's the first thing that I think of when I think of WrestleMania 7 is, of course, the first WrestleMania match with Taker and Jimmy Snuka. Jimmy Snuka being another person who I've met. So yeah, that's really cool. Maybe not the greatest of the Undertaker matches, but you got to start somewhere. And then yeah, Miss Elizabeth coming back to Macho Man, definitely a heartfelt moment, a feel-good moment, something that you like to see, especially at a pay-per-view or a PLE like WrestleMania.
WrestleMania 8 took place on April 5th, 1992 at the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis, Indiana. The main event was dumb here. It was Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice in just a regular match. We had Randy Savage versus Ric Flair for the WWE Championship, which should have been realistically the main event here. This was also Mania. Once again, talk about Undertaker matches. This was Undertaker versus Jake the Snake Roberts. And this is also, once again, a little fact check. This is the first WrestleMania for Shawn Michaels as the Heartbreak Kid breaking off from the Rockers a few months prior. And this is also, there's something, oh yes, it's also a fantastic match. One of the best matches of the card. Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental Championship, which once again, we'll point out, you can actually relive that on the WWE 2K24 showcase mode. It's not really one of the greatest WrestleManias, especially the main event should have been different. I think a lot of people were hoping it was going to be Hogan versus Flair because you had like the best wrestler from non-WWE versus WWE at the same time. So that would have been cool. But honestly, I still even mentioned in like the Pro Wrestling What If videos that like realistically the in-ring style of Macho Man versus Flair would have probably been better realistically than what Hogan would have pulled off with Flair.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of matches on this card are pretty solid. It's nothing that's too crazy, but it does get held back because of the main event being pretty lackluster. But I could see why WWE would do that, having Hogan main eventing WrestleMania.
WrestleMania 9 took place April 4th, 1993 at Caesars Palace in Paradise, Nevada, a little bit of an outskirts from Las Vegas, Nevada. I liked the theme going into this, which was like the Roman theme. And I remember the commentators at the because I ended up getting to watch this at some point on the network a few years back. The commentators came out on elephants, which I thought was pretty sweet. They had the cool like Roman, and I believe this was like the first pay-per-view appearance for Jim Ross as a commentator, which is really cool. This was indeed, like, if I'm rating like top 5 worst WrestleManias, this is on it. The ideas of some of the matches were pretty cool, but like a lot of them did end up in a count out or a disqualification victory, especially Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez Gonzalez was so garbage. I think that Undertaker could have wrestled a prickly cactus at this WrestleMania, and it would have been a better WrestleMania match than what we've seen with Giant Gonzalez. This was also the WrestleMania that caused a lot of controversy because the main event realistically was Bret Hart and Yokozuna for the WWE title. Yoko wins the title, and all of a sudden Hogan decided he's going to challenge for the title and squashes Yokozuna in 23 seconds to end off WrestleMania like that, which was bullshit. It would have been awesome to have Yokozuna at this point be the first heel to end off WrestleMania as champion instead of waiting for Triple H to do so at WrestleMania 2000. And how awesome would have also been had Hogan still done that challenge, but Yoko beat Bret and Hogan in the same night. That would have added so much credibility on top of what he already established at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to look at it. And yeah, this is one of the worst WrestleManias, but at the same time, it's so much fun. It's so much different than what you see with WrestleMania, especially back then. It's definitely one to watch for sure, even though, like you said, with most of the matches being like not great and like the countouts and all that. And of course, that Undertaker and Giant Gonzalez match is atrocious, but it is what it is, and it's history. And I personally do like that WrestleMania just because it's so fun to laugh at and watch while you're laughing at it.
Next up, WrestleMania X, March 20th, 1994 at Madison Square Garden in New York City, New York. This was definitely better than WrestleMania IX, that's for sure. The opening match is in my top 10 favorite matches of all time, that being Bret versus Owen Hart. Such a great match, seeing the heel being Owen actually win this match. So that added a lot of credibility to Owen Hart there, which was really awesome. For the Royal Rumble at that year, it was won by two winners, Bret Hart and Lex Luger. So we got to see two WWE title matches with Lex Luger versus Yoko, which saw Yoko won. And then the main event was Bret versus Yoko Part 2, where Bret Hart actually takes the title back after losing it at the year prior at WrestleMania 9. With this WrestleMania also, I can say that Undertaker actually was injured and he didn't compete at this WrestleMania. So that's one thing to, I believe Macho Man actually competed at this WrestleMania against like Crush, I believe. And there was something else I feel like, oh yeah, the ladder match. How could you imagine going through this podcast not talking about that ladder match with Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental title? Oh, I would have been chewed out in the comments right there. But yeah, overall, a great way to celebrate, I guess, this point, the 10th year of WrestleMania.
Yeah, this is a pretty solid one. I mean, of course, like you said, with the opening match, I feel like Owen versus Bret is on so many people's top 10 lists of their favorite matches of all time. And it makes sense because it's unreal. And so many people were happy to see Owen go over on Bret Hart at this point. And then, of course, the ladder match with Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels. I mean, that's an amazing match too. And it's so much different for that time seeing a gimmick match like a ladder match. Of course, we see ladder matches all the time in the last, like, let's say 20 years of wrestling. But that one, was that the first ever ladder match? At WrestleMania. Okay. So yeah, definitely really cool to see something like that. And especially again at the big one being WrestleMania.
WrestleMania 11, definitely once again one of the top 5 worst WrestleManias of all time. It happened April 2nd, 1995 at the Hartford Civic Center in Hartford, Connecticut. The main event for this WrestleMania was NFL player Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow, and then we had the WWE title match with Shawn Michaels, who had won the Royal Rumble, against Diesel. Their partnership kind of dissolved near the end of 94, and that's how that feud kind of started there. This was also Undertaker wrestled King Kong Bundy, which was and I think another match I could think of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Bret Hart faced Bob Backlund of all people in an I Quit match. I believe that was the case at this WrestleMania, but oh god, I watched this through its entirety, and maybe the only highlight of this WrestleMania, besides like the entire match of Shawn versus Diesel, is seeing Pamela Anderson walk out with Diesel.
Yeah, this is a weird one because, like, on paper, this seems like an all right WrestleMania, but yeah, definitely not a great one. And it does not stick out in my mind as like a great one. Obviously, I remember watching Shawn versus Diesel, but yeah, just not good.
WrestleMania 12 happened March 31st, 1996 at the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California. This was the WrestleMania with the main event being the Iron Man match between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart for the WWE Championship. This was also, I believe, the first WrestleMania for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Undertaker wrestled Diesel at this, and this is also the Hollywood backlot brawl between Goldust and Rowdy Roddy Piper, which was pretty entertaining because I believe it's one of those matches that like didn't all happen in a certain time frame. I believe it started at some point, and then it's like, all right, we're gonna go on to the next match while this is still continuing, and then you got to see the final parts, like I believe like near the semi-main event area. It's kind of like the early days of what we would end up seeing with like the hardcore title matches, where like sporadically through the show someone gets pinned and boom, new champion, and kind of like that deal, but with one match.
Yeah, this is an interesting WrestleMania, especially with that match with Goldust versus Piper, which is, I wouldn't say in my top 10 favorite matches of all time, but I do love watching that match. And it is interesting how they did go back and forth between actually watching the matches that are taking place in the ring. And then you get to see these, I guess, technically segments outside in like the parking lot. Just so cool the way they did that. This was a pretty solid WrestleMania.
Next up is WrestleMania 13. Took place March 23rd, 1997 at the Rosemont Horizon in Rosemont, Illinois. The main event was Undertaker versus Psycho Sid for the WWE Championship. Austin versus Bret Hart in the submission match, where we saw the famous double turn between the both of them. This was also, I believe, the first WrestleMania for The Rock under the Rocky Maivia persona, and I believe he was Intercontinental Champion at this case. I think Triple H and Mankind wrestled here. I can't exactly remember, but this was a mad WrestleMania. It's kind of like the in-between. Not the best, but not the worst either.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And what was the one match that you were just talking about? What were the matches?
So there was Undertaker and Psycho Sid. That's the main event.
Yes.
There was Austin and Bret Hart.
Okay, yes, that was the one that I was going to talk about. That is, again, one of those like iconic matches that a lot of people talk about, of course, with the double turn and all the great clips that you get from that match, especially like the sharpshooter there with Stone Cold, and then he passes out, right?
Yeah, he's got
blood
down his
Yeah, like that's, again, like it's almost on the level of, like I said earlier, with Andre and Hogan, but not quite, but it is one of those big ones that you see all the time.
WrestleMania 14 took place March 29th, 1998 at the Fleet Center, which I believe that is now TD Garden, if I'm not mistaken, in Boston, Massachusetts. This is where we famously see Stone Cold win his first WWE Championship after winning the Rumble and defeating Shawn Michaels. This is also where we got to see Undertaker versus Kane, which already they built a huge storyline since the summer previous from that match. This was also the WrestleMania, I believe there was a tag match with New Age Outlaws against Chainsaw Charlie and Cactus Jack, and the visual from that match is seeing New Age Outlaws push a dumpster off the stage that had Chainsaw Charlie and Cactus Jack in it. So that was a very crazy moment to see. And this was also the WrestleMania. I want to say there was Rock versus Ken Shamrock. At this point, it is The Rock and not Rocky Maivia. And I think Triple H wrestled Owen Hart, if I'm not mistaken. So a solid lineup, and a lot of people do consider this as kind of like the official stamp of this is now the Attitude Era, especially with Stone Cold at the top of the mountain as champion.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. This is a pretty solid WrestleMania, especially on paper, looking at the match card. I mean, it would take a lot for this not to be good with some of those matchups, especially like Triple H and Owen Hart. Like that's like one that I feel like they could have had like a ton of really good feuds, obviously, with Owen eventually passing, that we didn't get to see more of them two together in the ring. But yeah, definitely a really solid Mania.
Next up is WrestleMania 15, March 28th, 1999, at the First Union Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, First Union Center is Wells Fargo Arena now. I think that's what it is, where the Philadelphia Flyers play. So this WrestleMania, the main event, was the first of 3 matches of Stone Cold versus The Rock. This was also where we seen the Hell in a Cell match with Big Boss Man and The Undertaker. Talk about streak matches, where I always mention how crazy it would have been as a 7-year-old trying to explain to your classmates that, hey, I just seen a man get hung on a noose in Hell in a Cell like Big Boss Man. Like, that was just crazy, over the edge. There was also the Brawl for All, where Bart Gunn got knocked out by Butterbean. This is where, I can't remember the exact match, but Triple H turned heel in this match. He left DX and went to the corporation, and that's how we saw later on the whole game gimmick and how he really elevated himself as a top heel.
I feel like this is one of those WrestleManias that I remember bits and pieces of, but I feel like I don't know if I've actually watched like many of these matches in their entirety. So I guess I don't really have much to say about this one, but this is kind of getting into the heart of the Attitude Era, which is really cool. You can see the buildup of some of these different feuds and characters.
Next up is WrestleMania 16, or in this case, WrestleMania 2000, which I always think of like if they get to at some point, like thousands of years down the line, to a WrestleMania 2000, would they call it WrestleMania and then the year that it's in? Because that's basically what they did it here was it's WrestleMania 16, but because it took place April 2nd, 2000, that it was called WrestleMania 2000. But besides that, it took place at the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California, so the exact same place WrestleMania 12 took place. This was kind of a forgettable WrestleMania, not gonna lie. The main event was the Fatal 4-Way match with a McMahon in every corner featuring Big Show, Mick Foley, who had retired 30 days prior but somehow came back for this match, The Rock, who had won the Royal Rumble, so he had every right to be in there. Then Triple H, who was the top heel at this point, was the champion. And like I mentioned earlier, Triple H became the first heel to close off Mania and retain his championship. This was also a Mania, and this is where I feel like people would remember this Mania for, is the first triangle ladder match with Edge and Christian, the Dudleys, and the Hardys for the tag team championships. And this was also a WrestleMania from what I remember. There was a not 2 out of 3 falls, but 2 fall triple threat match with Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, and Chris Benoit. The Intercontinental and the European titles were on the line. 1 fall was for one title, and 1 was for the other. And I remember, I think Kurt Angle walked in with both titles. He walked out with no titles. So the other competitors got 1 title each. But this is the WrestleMania where I feel like it's that triangle ladder match that everyone remembers about and barely about that Fatal 4-Way main event.
Yeah, I mean, the first of the ladder matches there is definitely really cool. I think a lot of people really like the second one a lot more, but that is definitely the takeaway from this WrestleMania. The Fatal 4-Way, I feel like I see pictures of like what do you call it? Like what's the word for it? You would know the word for it, like showing them and like the
match card?
yeah,
Like the graphic?
the graphic for the match card. Yeah, I feel like that's one that like it's so ingrained in my mind, that one. But I like you said again, like this is kind of a forgettable WrestleMania, and calling it WrestleMania 2000 is kind of gimmicky. It's kind of cool, but at the same time, like when you just go back to calling it the number of the WrestleMania after that, then it's like, like whatever, right?
Next up is WrestleMania 17, or it's X7 in this case, April 1st, 2001 at Reliant Astrodome in Houston, Texas. People regard this as the best WrestleMania of all time. I mean, the main event was the second of 3 matches with Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. We seen Stone Cold turn heel at this night. There was also, speaking of streak matches, which I forgot to mention, Undertaker didn't wrestle at WrestleMania 2000 because he was injured, but here he was American Badass Undertaker in this point, and he wrestled Triple H on the show. There was also a pretty fun hardcore match, like triple threat match with Raven, Big Show, and Kane. Watching this over at one point, I remember seeing Kane do this big elbow drop off the stage, and he won the title that way. We seen the final match of the Hardys versus Edge and Christian versus the Dudleys in TLC 2. A lot of people think that like that first WrestleMania match was a TLC match. It wasn't. It was just a straight up ladder match, while the match at SummerSlam was the first TLC match. And this is also the match where we famously see Edge spear Jeff Hardy off of the ladder, which is also one of those huge moments that just engraves into your mind when it comes to WrestleMania. There's a really cool match with Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle. But yeah, a lot of people do claim this as like the best WrestleMania. I don't know if I would think it's like the best. I think it's definitely up there, but I don't know if it's like I do understand if you do say that it's the best WrestleMania, because it was pretty stacked and there was some pretty cool matches on this card, like what I've mentioned.
Yeah, it's hard to deny that this is a really, really great WrestleMania. Like you said, with Edge jumping off the ladder and spearing Jeff Hardy, that again is one of those big moments in WrestleMania history where that's always going to be like in the history books, and people are always going to like go back and say, well, remember that, like what a great moment at WrestleMania. But yeah, this is definitely a stacked card and a really good WrestleMania. It's a little bit forgettable for me, but that's because I wasn't even a wrestling fan at this point. So that's probably like the biggest reason why.
Next up is WrestleMania 18, or WrestleMania X8, March 17th, 2002 at the Skydome in Toronto, Canada. So happened to be the very first time I ever watched wrestling, and I've been a wrestling fan ever since. I want to say that I could memorize the exact order of the card, but I don't want to say that because I feel like I'll butcher some, but I do know a lot of matches that happened on this card. Like, first off, the main event was Chris Jericho and Triple H for the undisputed title. Then we had the infamous Icon versus Icon match with Rock and Hogan, which is just phenomenal with crowd reaction. There was also Undertaker versus Ric Flair, and he was Big Evil at this point, so he was like the heel version of American Badass. This also had a fatal four-way tag team match, I believe, with APA, Hardys, Dudleys, and Billy and Chuck of all teams. Forgot about them. They were the tag champs going in. Kurt Angle and Kane wrestled. Edge and Booker T wrestled each other, even though the whole point of that storyline was that they were fighting over a shampoo commercial. DDP versus Christian for the European Championship. And then I can say that the very first wrestling match I ever saw, because it was the opening match, was Rob Van Dam versus William Regal for the Intercontinental Championship. And I know there's definitely some matches that I think I'm forgetting. Oh, the semi-main event was a triple threat women's match between Jazz, Trish Stratus, and Lita for the women's title. I don't know if I'm forgetting any, but if I am, then I guess I'm sorry about that, especially because I feel like I should know every match, but I know I didn't say it in the correct order, obviously, but I know that's definitely the majority. I know most people would probably put it in like mid-tier WrestleMania, but I think personally it should be at least top 10 because like I think especially just icon versus icon alone has created like one of the best moments in wrestling history.
Yeah, so now I didn't actually like watch this WrestleMania as like my first time watching wrestling, but this is right when I started getting into wrestling. I was watching like I don't know if it would have been like Raw or SmackDown or whatever when I was out like I said earlier with like my dad at like his buddy's place and wrestling would be on. So this is right when I was getting into wrestling and this was a great WrestleMania. I have a WrestleMania X8 or a WrestleMania 18 shirt that's actually signed by Triple H, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall. I need to get Shawn Michaels' autograph on there to complete the click. I think that would be really, really cool. But besides the point, this is an amazing WrestleMania. There's so much good stuff on here. Like DK had said with the icon versus icon match, that was so, to put it in the best way possible, electrifying, and the crowd reaction, like he said, the pops that you hear from that match, so crazy. And I remember like thinking as a kid, like I didn't like the outcome of that match, but now that I like really like look back and think about it, I was like, oh, I was such a Hogan stan, I guess, at that point, and I thought he was so amazing, so that it makes sense now, like to see the way that that match went. And yeah, this is just, I would say this is easily one of the best WrestleManias.
Now I actually remember one match I forgot about because you mentioned one of his names. Scott Hall wrestled Stone Cold Steve Austin on the show, where you see like the infamous, like huge, like what seemed like 6 foot air that Scott Hall happened with the Stone Cold Stunner, which was just absolutely insane. My dad always talks about like, remember the time Scott Hall was like 6 feet in the air for the Stone Cold Stunner? Like, yeah, like that's also one thing to mention about. So the next WrestleMania is WrestleMania 19, March 30th, 2003 at Safeco Field in Seattle, Washington. This was a pretty banger WrestleMania, not gonna lie. Like from top to bottom, like in-ring match quality wise, like it was definitely like I feel like just by match quality wise is like a really great WrestleMania. Main event was Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle for the WWE Championship. Of course, we do talk about the infamous botch shooting star press, but we can't just take away WrestleMania from that, even though like people talk about that a lot. Undertaker wrestled a 2-on-1 handicap match against A-Train and Big Show at this event. This was also the event that had a lot of controversy when you basically had like white supremacy storyline with Triple H and Booker T, and that Triple H won that match. This was also the WrestleMania with the final match in the trilogy of matches for The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, which finally saw The Rock defeat Stone Cold Steve Austin. And this was, until WrestleMania 38, the final match of Stone Cold's career. Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho. The opening match I remember was Matt Hardy versus Rey Mysterio for the Cruiserweight title, which was great. I believe there was also a wicked, like, triple threat tag team match for the tag team titles. And I believe it was Los Guerreros, Benoit, and Rhino, and then Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin, the world's greatest tag team, or at that point, it was Team Angle. There was another women's triple threat match where Trish Stratus actually won this time around. I felt like she should have won at WrestleMania 18 in her hometown, but I know there's definitely probably maybe one or two I'm missing out on for some reason, but overall, like, a lot of matches were bangers, and like I love rewatching this every time I get to.
Yeah, this was a really solid WrestleMania. And this was at the point where now I'm becoming more of a wrestling fan, but I wasn't buying pay-per-view. So I didn't really know what had happened at WrestleMania. I'd watch like Raw and I would see like title changes or whatever, but I really had to like kind of just assume what's happening. You know what I mean by that? Like I wasn't actually watching these matches happen while they were happening to try and like fill in those gaps as a kid. Like, oh, okay, this must have happened. Sometimes, of course, they show like clips of what happened at the pay-per-views, but this is definitely one that I have to go back and rewatch. I have watched it, but it's been at least 18 years, I think, since I've watched this one. So yeah, definitely have to go back and watch it.
Next up is WrestleMania 20, March 14th, 2004 at Madison Square Garden in New York City, New York. This was where we had the main event triple threat match for the World Heavyweight Championship, Chris Benoit, Shawn Michaels, and HBK. Speaking of streak matches, the Dead Man gimmick for The Undertaker returns as he faces his brother Kane after burying him alive at Survivor Series the prior year. We also had Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle in one of the most brilliant finishes I have ever seen. Kurt Angle goes for the ankle lock, and Eddie's boot falls off and just scoops him up for a nice pinfall right there. I thought that was so brilliant of a finish for a match. This also had the 3-on-2 handicap match of Evolution versus the Rock and Sock Connection, which I thought was pretty cool. I know there was a couple, I believe, like fatal 4-way tag team championship matches on this show for like both the Raw and SmackDown titles. There was also Chris Jericho versus Christian, I believe, where we saw Trish Stratus turn her back on Chris Jericho in this match. There's definitely something that like screams out WrestleMania tour. Oh, the first match where John Cena wins the US title from the Big Show. I think that's something huge where we're starting to see the rise of John Cena at this point and earning his way by winning one of the top mid-card titles. I'm trying to think, the Intercontinental title wouldn't have been defended because Orton was the champion and he was involved in the handicap match. This still, like, we're in the middle right now of talking about a huge stretch of like banger after banger after banger WrestleManias, and this was one of them.
Yeah, definitely. WrestleMania 20 is amazing. And again, this is one of those ones where I'd watch and like I would see the next week that like, oh my God, John Cena is the United States champion. I, of course, didn't really care about John Cena too much at this point because, of course, he was kind of that mid-carder and not the mega superstar that he ends up becoming. But overall, yeah, this was a great one. And it is kind of in the middle of a stretch of WrestleManias that were all just really damn good.
WrestleMania 21 took place April 3rd, 2005 at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, California. And I believe, oh God, is this the arena that's now called the Crypto.com Arena? I know one of the arenas. I hate that name so much. They just go with whatever name sponsors. So WrestleMania 21, once again, banger WrestleMania. Probably, I would say, the second best opening match to a WrestleMania ever, because I don't think anything in my mind at least would top off Brett versus Owen, but this is where we had Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero as the opening match, which was awesome. The main event was Batista versus Triple H for the World Heavyweight title. We seen John Cena defeat JBL for the WWE title. Randy Orton tried ending the streak against The Undertaker, and I believe this is the WrestleMania where they finally acknowledged that The Undertaker had a streak and that they were just building up matches at this point to where it wasn't just the titles you were looking forward to at WrestleMania anymore. It's the streak also that's like, who is challenging Undertaker this year and can they beat the streak? And this was kind of the first match that kind of like brought that aura to life for WrestleMania. This also had Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle, which was so good. I can't say any bad things about this match. One random match that for some reason it just popped up in my head now was a sumo match with Big Show and Aki Bono, which just sounds so ridiculous. And this is also, because you brought it up earlier, the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match, which saw MD's favorite superstar of all time, the rated R superstar Edge win that match.
Yeah, this is an awesome WrestleMania, and it led to one of my favorite feuds of all time being Edge and John Cena. I just loved the work that they did. Some people didn't love it as much as I did, but Edge holding the briefcase was awesome. I loved his rated R superstar gimmick with Lita and all that, and him just having this power that he could unleash and becoming like dubbed the ultimate opportunist with that was so amazing. And of course that stemmed from this WrestleMania with the first Money in the Bank, and then Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle, amazing. And then, yeah, of course, the opening match with Rey and Eddie Guerrero. It's hard to deny that their chemistry was insane. They always put on banger matches, and you know they were going all out at WrestleMania.
Next up is WrestleMania 22, happened April 2nd, 2006 at the Allstate Arena in Rosemont, Illinois. That was the same arena as the Rosemont Horizon, but they renamed it to Allstate Arena. So this WrestleMania, I will say that I don't entirely think it's like a banger compared to the last few WrestleManias, but still very great. still a very good WrestleMania. And I know for a fact MD always talks about loving this WrestleMania, and he'll probably go into discussing about that WrestleMania. But this WrestleMania, the main event was Triple H versus John Cena for the WWE Championship. We also seen the triple threat match with Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, and Kurt Angle for the World Heavyweight Championship. This WrestleMania also had the casket match with Undertaker and Mark Henry. So to continue that streak, another Money in the Bank ladder match with like the most random, obscure participants that you can think of to participate in this match. And this is the Money in the Bank match that screams at the top of my mind of the moment where Ric Flair gets superplexed off the ladder and he's like, ah! And he's just like yelling off the top of his lungs. He's almost like dying there. And he just oversold the hell out of that and just like made you think like, is he actually hurt? That WrestleMania also had the infamous match, which I feel like people talk about as match of the night, Edge versus Mick Foley in the hardcore match. Mickie James versus Trish Stratus, a very memorable match, especially with some jesters.
Yeah, so WrestleMania 22, amazing for me. I love this. The whole reason is, again, like I said, like I wasn't watching pay-per-views as they were happening. And our good buddy Robbie was actually set to spend the night over at my place. And I was at the mall earlier that day, and there was like some store at the mall, and they had just gotten WrestleMania 22 on DVD. And I bought it, and I fell in love with this WrestleMania. Every match, I love the whole. One of my favorite parts about this WrestleMania is having, and it had been like this, I believe, the road to WrestleMania, I guess you could say, where they have everyone's faces, like all the superstars along the arena. That was so cool to me. I loved that part of this WrestleMania. Of course, Edge versus Mick Foley, one of my favorite matches of all time, with an amazing finish with Lita lighting that table on fire and Edge spearing Mick Foley through it. Trish Stratus and Mickie James, that was an awesome buildup of a feud where Mickie James was this lesbian and she loved Trish Stratus so much. I loved that as well. The Money in the Bank match was great as well. When you look at the superstars that were in this match, like Finlay and Ric Flair being these two older guys that are in the match, Bobby Lashley, who's like an up-and-coming superstar and a big boy, Shelton Benjamin, who is set for a Money in the Bank ladder match. He is like unreal. He's the guy for a Money in the Bank ladder match. And then John Cena versus Triple H. That was a match that I had watched a million times over. The underdog story in Rey Mysterio, where he wins the Royal Rumble and then basically loses his Royal Rumble like opportunity to go to WrestleMania to Randy Orton. And then I believe Teddy Long is the one that makes it so that it's going to be a triple threat match at WrestleMania. And it makes sense. Rey Mysterio gets the pin on Randy Orton, not Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle can't break up the pin in time, and he just squeaks out and wins that world title, which was another really good feel-good moment. This is just one of my favorite and probably the WrestleMania that I've watched the most times. And by that, I mean, like, I've seen this WrestleMania probably 40 times.
Anyways, guys, that's going to be the end of this first part of our podcast. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your opinions down below as terms to WrestleMania. And we hope to see you guys tomorrow for part 2 of this podcast. 1, 2, 3, I'm out of here.